Brothers and sisters of the Warhammer universe, welcome back to Tortuga's Grim Rosaline. My name is Jeff, and today I'm going to show you how I paint a Grimdark Black Legion Abaddon the Despoiler. And I'm not going to lie, between Abaddon and my Vashdor, those are two of the best paint jobs I've done so far to date. And I need to give credit where credit is due. When my daughter and I first started into this whole universe that is Warhammer, we found two YouTube channels that just blew our minds with how inspirational they are. The Feral Painter and the Grimdark Compendium. And after watching endless amounts of their videos, we decided that we wanted to make our own footprint into the world of Grimdark. So to the two of your sites, thank you so much for being such an inspiration to my daughter and to myself. And before we get into my paint job, I need you all to do those YouTube things that you do so well. Down below, click like, share, subscribe. And now that's out of the way, let's do this.
So here's a list of all the paints that we'll be using on this build. We're going to start off with Vallejo Model Color Red and Thinner. So Abaddon has been primed in Vallejo's black and gray, also base coated in Vallejo's black, red, and ivory. We're going to use the model color red to paint Abaddon's ponytail off the top of his head, as well as the tabard, and we're going to be also doing all of the low lighting on the cloak. And as you can see, we're going to be doing two thin coats of this red to really bring it out against the base colors. Next is Citadel's Evil Sunz Scarlet and Thinner. With the Evil Sunz Scarlet, we are going to do all of the highlighting on the cloak, the ponytail, and the tabard. And I'm sure somebody's going to start yelling at me and saying, it's not a ponytail. I don't know what else to call it, so it's a ponytail. And just like the red, we're going to do two thin coats to really bring out that highlighting. Up next is Vallejo's Game Color Evil Red and Thinner. With the Evil Red, we're going to paint the base of the insignia on the belt. And to be honest, the only thing I would have probably done different is maybe did a layer of gray before putting on the Evil Red, just to bring it up that much higher. But no matter what, do 2 to 3 coats to really bring this out. Next up is Vallejo's Model Air Copper. And I know you didn't think that we were going to be able to finish this model without having to do it. Definitely not with Abaddon. It's time for the Chaos trim. We're going to use the copper to do 2 coats to all the trim, as well as the insignia on the belt and parts of the sword. And remember, this is a metallic, so if that first coat doesn't really look that great, the second is going to really bring it in. And don't worry about slightly going over, we're going to be able to touch up after. Next is Citadel's Stormvermin Fur and Thinner. So we're going to use the Stormvermin Fur to, you guessed it, paint all the fur off the cape. And with that being said, welcome Elvira, our Russian blue cat. She always has perfect time as we're painting a bluish gray for a blue-gray cat. And remember, we're doing 2 thin coats of this. Up next is Citadel's Ironbreaker and Thinner. We're going to be using the Ironbreaker as a base on the blade of the sword, as well as the blades on his claws, and all of the pistons on his power armor. Just like with trim, don't worry if you slightly go over painting the pistons onto the armor, we're always going to be able to do touch-ups. And with that being said, don't forget we always do 2 thin coats. Especially when we do metallics, that second coat is always going to help it make it look its best. Next is Citadel's Dark Reaper and Thinner. So we're going to use the Dark Reaper to paint all of the cables along Abaddon's armor, as well as the in-between joints of the armor plates. And because Dark Reaper is so awesome, we only have to do 1 coat. I'm just kidding. We're always doing 2 thin coats. Next is Vallejo's Model Air Signal Red and Model Air Black. So we're going to be doing a 1-to-1 of the Signal Red and Black to do the fillery on the base of the sword. And of course, we're going to be doing 2 thin coats of this to really bring it out against the Ironbreaker base. And with that being said, it's time for Tig to also come up and help join in the painting process. And with all the base metallics finished, it's definitely looking like a great start. Up next is Citadel's Yriel Yellow and Thinner. So we're going to use the Yriel Yellow to paint the Eye of Horus on the shoulder armor. And yes, it will always be the Eye of Horus to me. And remember, we're always doing 2 coats to make this look as best as possible. Next is Vallejo's Game Air Bonewhite. So we're going to use the Bonewhite to paint all of the skulls and teeth on the armor, as well as the skulls and bones on the base. And I always like using the airbrush version of Vallejo's Bonewhite because it's already thin, it doesn't clog up, and with 2 coats, everything looks great. And with a quick once-over on our Abaddon, we're making great progress. Up next is Vallejo's Game Color Gory Red and Thinner. So we're going to be using the Gory Red to paint the helmets that are on the base, as well on the pikes off of Abaddon's armor. I like using this color red for the helmets on the pike and the base because we're going to be using blood for the blood god later on. And these 2 reds are going to be so different that they will not blend in. Next is Vallejo's Model Air Light Gray. We're going to lightly paint the gray on top of the vermin on the fur just to bring it out that much more before shading. And no, your eyes aren't deceiving you. My camera went blurry a couple times through this recording. Next is Citadel's Warp Lightning. We are going to use the warp green to paint the lenses on the Blood Angel helmets on the base and on the pike. And we purposely did not put a white underneath this as we don't want this to make it look like it's glowing. But we're going to definitely do 2 to 3 coats to really bring that color in. Up next is Citadel's Macragge Blue and Thinner. You can't have an awesome Black Legion piece like Abaddon without a fallen Space Marine. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that Macragge Blue and we're going to do 2 coats on the Space Marine on the base. And don't worry, I know it's going to come off pretty bright right off the bat. We're going to shade it down later on in the process and make it look nice and weathered. Up next is Citadel's Liberator Gold. And it seems even Ultramarines can't escape the trim, so we're going to use that Liberator Gold to go ahead and paint the trim around the shoulder pads, as well as the chest, head insignia, and the belt buckle. Next is Citadel's Ryza Rust. With this being Abaddon and my first year anniversary of getting into painting, I wanted to try to do a couple new techniques that would really make him stand out. So we're going to apply the Ryza Rust around the corners of most of the armor plates to really bring a bright rust. And I tried, as you can see, to pack in especially around where the copper met the armor. Up next is Citadel's Nihilakh Oxide. So I'm going to be applying this to all of the copper emblems on Abaddon, as well as the corners of any of the copper areas on the armor to really bring out some nice oxidation. And with a quick once over, I think it's looking really great. Yes, it might be bright, but we're going to darken it up later on. Up next is Vallejo's Model Color White, Vallejo Game Color Sun Yellow, Vallejo's Game Color Hot Orange, Vallejo's Game Color Scarlet Blood and Thinner, Citadel's Black Templar. So we're going to paint the torch on the base, and we're going to start off by painting all the fire areas white. Once the white dries, we're going to paint the base third of the flames 2 coats of yellow. We're then going to paint the middle third orange and the last third red. And it's very important we do not let these colors dry because we are going to start blending them. And now that all the thirds are painted, we're going to start blending. And I usually start with blending in the yellow and the orange first, making a gradual darker from the yellow to the orange, and then doing the same between the orange and the red. We're then going to use the Black Templar to paint just the tips of the edge of the flames. And don't be scared to go back to your color palette and use those 3 base colors and continue to blend throughout the flame how you want it. Up next is Vallejo's Game Ink Blue. We are going to use a very light amount of the blue ink as just a cold texture to put on the base of the skin and into the crevices. Next is Villainy Ink's Goon's Grime. We're then going to use the Goon's Grime to help enhance the blue and give a weathered effect to the skin, letting that go into the crevices along with the blue. As you can see, we now have a face that looks cold and filthy from battle. Up next is Winsor & Newton's Lamp Black and Burnt Sienna. We're going to use my oil wash version of Argax Earthshade to shade in all of the skulls, all of the bronze, all of the armor, and everything around the base. And you can be as generous as you want with this, because any areas that come off too dark or too filled, we're just going to take a Q-tip with some mineral spirits and lightly dab and brush those areas to where we want. Next up is Winsor & Newton's French Ultramarine and Cadmium Red. So this is my oil wash version of Druchii Violet, and we're going to use this on the tabard as well as the cloak. And again, we're going to add this generously. After 5 to 10 minutes of drying, we can take a dry brush and start maneuvering around some of the areas of the wash, or take a Q-tip with some mineral spirits and start dabbing off areas or pushing the wash to other areas that we want to be darkened up more. Up next is Winsor & Newton's Cadmium Red and Cadmium Orange. So this is my oil wash version of Fugan Orange, and I'm going to use this onto the corners of the Eye of Horus to bring a glowing effect and make it go darker towards the edges. Next up is Winsor & Newton's Titanium White, Phthalian Blue, Cerulean Blue, and French Ultramarine. So I'm going to use these colors mixed with a very little amount of mineral spirits to make a thicker wash. We're going to put the French Ultramarine into all of the mouth and eyelets on the sword, and then mix between the Cerulean, the Phthalo, and the Titanium White, fluctuating throughout the sword to give a power effect. Next up is Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna, Cadmium Red Deep Hue, and Titanium White. So we're going to use this oil wash as more of a flesh tone to bring some warmth back into what we started with earlier with making the cold skin look and the weathered effect. Up next is ABT 502's Dust. We're going to take a very light amount of the dust on the tip of our paintbrush, and we're going to use that to slightly blend into the areas of the forehead and the cheeks to make a highlighted effect. Next is Villainy Inc.'s Coelia Green. So we're going to use this to go over the areas that we already started on the oxidation process on the copper, the emblems, and certain corners, but we're going to make this a lot darker and grungier with this. Up next is Villainy Inc.'s Sector Rust. We're going to use the Sector Rush very generously over all of the armor plates and a lot of the metallics, but not any place that we have highlighted. We're also going to heavily go over the areas that we did with the brighter rust earlier to really enhance that. And with either of the Villainy Inks, when we're looking over these, if any of them look too dark or too saturated in certain areas, we can take a Q-tip with some mineral spirits and dab them over till we get it the way we want. Next up is Vallejo's Model Air Signal Red. We're going to use this red to thinly put highlights throughout some of the strands of the ponytail to really help bring out the definition. Next up is Vallejo's Game Color Glorious Gold. We're going to use the Glorious Gold to do the highlighting on all of the copper areas on Abaddon and on the base, including going over the weathering area and bringing out some highlights through the weathering. And with the weathered emblem areas, any areas that have ridges, I really want to put that gold on to help them stand out even more. Up next is Vallejo's Model Air Chrome. We're going to use the chrome to highlight all of the metallic areas on Abaddon and the base, like the chain and especially on the blades of his claws. And especially on the claws, always do 2 thin coats. Next is Citadel's Stormvermin Fur and Thinner. We're going to use the Stormvermin Fur to go over the fur pelt on his shoulder. And we're going to make sure the highlighted areas that we did with the light gray, we're going to go back over now that everything's been weathered with that Stormvermin Fur to really bring out a nice texture. Next is Citadel's Blood for the Blood God. You can't have Grimdark without a whole lot of blood, and Blood for the Blood God's going to give it to you. We're going to put the Blood for Blood God on the claws on the hand, as well as all the skulls on Abaddon's posts, as on the base, and the Space Marine on the ground. For mine, I chose not to put it on the sword to keep it that power mystical look, but feel free to go with what you feel best. And there you have it, a Grimdark Abaddon the Despoiler, the head of the Black Legion. looking as sinister as one could ever imagine. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you might have picked up something that you can use along one of your future builds. And like I always say, Grim for the Grim Rosaline.